Okay, testing. Okay, testing again. Audio is working. Okay. All right, apologies, folks. The technology is just half working in our room today. But we're ready to go, and we are live and recording. I can put on my camera at least. Hi, everyone. My name is Laura Lapierre. I'm the Wetlands Program Manager, and we're here today to talk about the wetland rule changes. Today is December 16th, 2025 at 1:06 p.m. We have around 50 people on Teams video and several folks here in the room in Montpelier. So I will get started. If someone in the group on chat could let me know if you see the screen. Can you see the screen, Lauren? Yes. That's okay. We got it. I believe that will work now. Okay, people can hear me, they can see it. We're getting thumbs up. Thank you, folks, for bearing with me on this today. Yes, so again, I'm Laura Lapierre, Wetlands Program Manager. In the room, helping out in the chat is Lauren Sofer, who is one of our district wetlands ecologists, and we also have our commissioner with us today, Misty. So quickly for some virtual housekeeping, we ask that you mute yourselves, turn off your video. You can to save your bandwidth. You can type in the chat and you can raise your hand to speak if you're comfortable from the interwebs, raising your hand to speak your comment. That will make it a bit more interactive for folks. So for today, I'm going to present on what the rule changes proposal is, like some of the mechanics on that. And we can have some question answer on how that really works, like what the colors on the mapping means and things like that. But when it comes to comments about the content of the rule, we're just collecting comments for today, and we will be collecting them through January 14th and putting together a responsiveness summary. And that response summary in writing will be going to the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rule as part of the record for all of this. And it will be available up on the web as well. So thank you for your patience with that. So my presentation is really going to go through first what the current rule is for those of you new to it, why we're having a rule change, what the changes really are, how you can figure out whether your neighborhood or your project is eligible for this allowed use, and also then wrapping up with how we're improving our wetland mapping. Okay, so Real quickly, we've had the Vermont Wetland rules since 1990 protecting wetlands because we find that they have significant functions and values that are valuable for Vermonters and for the natural environment. Um, in 1990, the protections were specifically for those wetlands that were mapped on the Vermont Significant Wetlands Inventory, or those areas that were connected to those mapped areas. In 2010, the rules were changed quite a bit to include all of those wetlands that were not included on the maps, um, so that we could designate them as class 2 because of significant functions and values, because the mapping just did not pick up on all of those. Um, Wetlands are those areas between where land and water meet. So it takes, scientists evaluating the soils, the plants, and the hydrology to really delineate that edge, that boundary between wetland and upland, to know exactly where it is so that people can avoid and minimize impacts. We have a three-tiered system. Class 2 wetlands are the bulk of our wetlands in Vermont that are protected for their significant function and value. Class 1 wetlands are also protected. They're exemplary and they're all listed in the appendix of the rule. And then Class 3 wetlands are wetlands that have not been found to be significant and they're not regulated by the state. We have a 50-foot buffer zone for class 2 wetlands automatically, 100-foot buffer zone for class 1, unless there is a request or as part of rulemaking for the class 1, it is made a different size, which there are a few that are a bit different from the 100 feet there. We review projects that happen within wetlands or their buffer zones to evaluate whether there's an undue adverse effect on functions and values. We only issue permits for activities within wetlands if the wetlands are not adversely affected or if those effects are mitigated through compensation. So that's our current rule that's still in effect today. The reason that we are here is because this September, the governor issued an executive order to promote housing and construction and rehabilitation of housing. And it had a number of pieces in the order that compels several agencies to take steps to support housing by streamlining requirements which housing projects in Vermont are subject to. Section 3.1 specifies modifications to the Vermont wetland rules. It establishes the areas of the state that are affected by the change. It calls for no permits for impacts within unmapped class 2 wetlands, and also reduces buffer zone for those mapped wetland areas down to 25 feet. The Department of Environmental Conservation has determined that the implementation of these directives is best implemented through a formal rulemaking amendment. So that's why we're here today. So those changes aren't effective immediately, and we're still working with the current 2023 wetland rules. We also have a statutory requirement to be updating the wetland rules to conform with Act 121, the Flood Safety Act requirements that was passed last session in the legislature. We have been working on those changes, but they're not part of this rule edit. They weren't quite ready for prime time for going through rulemaking. So this is really just the piece that is associated with the executive order. Okay, so there's really 3 specific spots to look for changes in the rule. I'll spend the bulk of this presentation speaking to section 6.26, which is the allowed use. That's the section of the rule that specifies what activities can happen within wetlands without a permit. Then there's 3 other places really, but 8.4 and 9.6 is very similar. It's removing the reconsideration process for permits and classification petitions. So right now, a person can give comment to classification petitions as well as rule change, as well as permit applications. Then when we issue a decision, they can request a reconsideration for the agency to reconsider that decision, and then they can later appeal the permit. So it's kind of a in-between appeal step. And in order to streamline final decisions, we're proposing to remove that reconsideration piece of the process. People can still provide comments during the public comment period, and people can still appeal the permit decisions. Section 8.5 is working to standardize our wetland map edit process. There's a couple ways that we have to notice them, and we've just lumped them all into the same process to help with the administration of map edits. Okay, so jumping right into the allowed use. So again, these are activities that occur in wetland and buffer that don't need a permit. And I'm giving you here like the short part version, and then I'm going to expand upon that quite a bit. So this is an allowed use for the construction of residential housing projects and the related required utilities that are located in designated areas and outside of 25 feet of mapped wetland areas, unless the activities are necessary utilities that follow best management practices. So if you have an activity, if you have a housing project that avoids within 25 feet of a mapped area, it is an allowed use. That is the proposal. And there's a lot of defining terms in this paragraph, so I'm going to get into that detail now. So specifically, residential housing projects is defined in there, single-family, multi-unit, multifamily housing projects, shelter projects, or even a mixed-use project that includes a residential housing component. This doesn't include improvements to existing housing that aren't necessary for someone to live in it. So extending your lawn, you don't need that to live in that area, so that doesn't qualify under the allowed use. However, if you really need to get your septic replaced, that would qualify. We have a definition of required utilities. It's limited to just this list here. So the next definition is designated areas. This is a long list. I'm going to spend a few slides on this, and there's an online map that you can look at interactively to figure out what areas of the state qualify, and I'll show some clips from that as well. So a designated area includes, point number 1, defined areas in the state that are called downtown development districts, village centers, new town centers, growth centers, and neighborhood development areas. And those qualify if the project is served by a public sewer or has the adequate wastewater permits that are needed. Secondly, anything that is considered an opportunity zone, which is federally designated. Again, you have to have that wastewater treatment piece to it. Third, if your sewer extends beyond one of these designated areas, or your water line extends beyond, and the project can hook up to one or both of those municipal services, then those would also qualify as designated area. Then there's also the Act 250 exemptions. So Act 250 is Vermont's land use and development law. And there's permits associated with that, a whole separate program from the wetland rules. But this is proposing to tie those exemptions in with the wetland allowed use. So firstly, they have a tiered system, and in Act 250, that would be Act 250 exempt if it was Tier 1A or T1B status projects that the Land Use Development Review Board determines. And right now, there are no Tier 1A, 1B projects yet. Those will be designated started in 2026. There are interim housing exemptions through Act 250 from Act 250 review. And those are a bit more detailed, so I'll get into that in a couple of slides. But right now, currently, there's a list of types that are qualifying for Act 250 and therefore qualifying for the allowed use. I'll add that those interim exemptions and the list in point number 1 are very similar. And like I said before, tiers are starting in 2026. So for the interim exempt areas, those with an asterisk are overlapping with what's specifically called out in the allowed use. So designated downtowns, new town centers, growth centers, neighborhood development, and village centers. Some of those have a cap on the number of units that they can have to be considered exempt through Act 250. There is no cap on the number of units for the allowed use. Then there are also transit corridors, which are areas within a quarter-mile of certain transit routes. If the housing project is 50 units or under, it would qualify for the allowed use as well as the Act 250 exemption. And then there are priority housing projects that qualify for the exemption, so they have to qualify as priority housing and also be within a half mile of some of these other designated areas to qualify. So we have a map for that. Here's a zoomed out version of all the areas that we know would be qualifying as designated areas. It does not include all of the sewer lines that extend beyond the red zones. Those just aren't mapped, as well as water lines aren't all mapped. That's something that the person would need to look into as to whether their project is eligible for that portion of the allowed use. The opportunity zones are some of the largest areas because those are all census tract sizes. So you see Johnson, the entire town of Johnson is included, for example. And those need to either have, those projects need to have sewer hookup or have a wastewater permit. There's a lot of detail to this, so I'll just say that we will be providing a checklist to aid people in figuring out whether or not they qualify for the allowed use. So zooming in a bit on the designated areas. So last night we had our presentation in Springfield. So here's the greater Springfield area, where Springfield is an opportunity zone and Chester is also, it looks like that might be priority housing as well as downtown. And then here is the greater Montpelier area with areas in Berlin and Barry and Plainfield and Northfield. So we have a map, which we are putting links in the chat for those of you who are online. So I'll just walk through some of these areas. So here is Springfield. The dark pink is a downtown area. Layered on top of that are housing, priority housing projects in the light pink. So projects that qualify for the Act 250 exemption would also qualify under our allowed use. I'll mention that the light blue lines, those are streams and rivers, and the teal are mapped wetlands. The hatched teal wetlands are wetlands that we have mapping of, but they haven't been formally adopted onto the Vermont Significant Wetlands Inventory, which I'll get into that a bit later, but just so you know what you're looking at here on the screen. And then thirdly, all of Springfield is considered an opportunity zone. So if you have a residential project that can hook up to sewer or have septic services for all of your housing units, then the project would qualify under the allowed use. So for another area, here is Essex Junction, approximately in the middle, with some mapped wetlands. Essex is considered a downtown development area, so that is in the dark pink. Light pink again is the priority housing projects. The light blue added here are village centers. So those areas would qualify. And then you add the transit areas. So those are all the dark blue, the quarter mile from transit routes. And then the light gray on top of that are areas that we know that there is municipal sewer. So those areas would also qualify if your project could hook up to those. So the distinction here is these areas that have none of those layers on top, 100% need a wetland delineation to move forward with the project. You would be looking for soils, plants, and hydrology to delimit the edge from where it's wetland, where it's upland. You'd have a 50-foot buffer zone, and you'd be designing your project outside of those areas as much as possible. For these other areas, you'd be using the wetland maps. So whatever's on the wetland map and within 25 feet of the wetland map is what the projects will need to avoid as much as possible. And if there is a utility crossing, that might also qualify under the allowed use as the draft rule is written right now. So I'll dive into that a bit more in these next couple of slides with little cartoons. So here on the screen on the left is an example of the existing rules, and on the right on the proposal. So the symbology of the cattails is showing the dark opaque cattails are mapped wetland areas, but the wetland extends beyond the mapping. And so that's the transparent cattails. They're not seen on the mapping, but they do exist. They're in the field. It checks out the soils, plants, and hydrology. It is wetland. So under the existing rules, you delineate where the wetland is on the ground, and your project would seek to avoid 50 feet from that wetland edge for the housing projects outside of designated areas and under our existing rule. The proposed rule requires a 25-foot buffer zone from the mapped area. So in this example, there are two homes and they're avoiding the mapped wetland area only. So here's another example where all of the wetland is mapped. And this housing project needs a underground utility crossing. So this might still qualify for the allowed use. They're staying 25 feet away with their housing project. And then the utilities have to cross the wetland. And so um, those those crossings can qualify as long as they're following best management practices, which are listed in general here. They're up on the rulemaking webpage. So if you want to look into the details, you certainly can. And those are in draft form. So for necessary utility crossings, we have some general measures, just making sure that you're dealing with erosion control, protecting associated streams, and also preventing invasive spread from the work. And then there are some specific ways in which you would construct the specific types of utilities, overhead, underground, access roads, etc. The guide also has more additional guidance with information, recommendations on how to plan your project, pre and post construction considerations, and even recommendations for the allowed use residential areas as well, just as like, here are some best practices to make the best of for your project paired with the wetland resource. This is written in the draft rule right now as a best management practice. However, the department is leaning towards making this aspect, instead of a best management practice under the allowed use, making it a general permit. So that would mean we would have, like, after rule adoption, go through a general permit, public comment period, and issuance of a general permit. So for the sake of the comments that you're considering today, feel free, like whatever's in the best management practice now would likely be in the general permit. So if you'd like to provide comments, that would be useful for us as well. So that is the allowed use change in a nutshell. Now I'll jump onto the wetland mapping, because as you can see, it's pretty critical for understanding where your wetlands are for this allowed use to have these wetlands mapped. We have a few different types of wetland mapping layers in the state and federally, so I'll take a second to describe that. So there is a national wetlands inventory that U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service oversees, and our wetlands program has been working with contractors to update the entire state. It's been updated. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife has adopted onto their national map these additional wetlands. The Vermont Significant Wetlands Inventory is our jurisdictional layer for the state. So that is where we say these wetlands are 100% class 2. You can still petition to have that reevaluated, but that layer is there so people know what's jurisdictional. It isn't always, it's mostly through aerial interpretation. It started with an adoption of what the National Wetlands Inventory was. So a lot of it is through aerial interpretation. Some of it is delineations that we've received from consultants. So like boots on the ground review versus an aerial interpretation review. The advisory layer is something that we have on the A&R Atlas. It's just advisory when we find wetlands, or we're doing some desktop review, we might add those wetlands onto the map so that people are just more aware of where wetlands are in the state. It doesn't say whether it's class 2, class 3, etc. It's just wetland areas, heads up. So it's the VSWI that is the layer that's used under this allowed use. So those are the wetlands that would need to be avoided and within 25 feet of those areas. I see people taking a lot of notes, so I want to just say I'll be posting this on YouTube, this presentation, so you'll have a chance to look again. So we've been working really hard to improve the VSWI. Some areas were created in the 70s and 80s, and we have a lot better technology and imagery and such to update this. So we've, again, worked with contractors updating the National Wetlands Inventory, because our funding came from US EPA and they want us to work to those standards. And we've used that and adopted some of the national wetlands area for a couple of areas in the state, including the Winooski Basin, which is where we sit today. The mapping update actually improved the mapping by 145%. It was very much needed. Here's an image that's just showing in East Montpelier the areas of VSWI before the change this year, and then the blue is what the updates are. This was done, again, using aerial imagery zoomed out to 1 to 12,000 foot level. So you can certainly see more wetlands through aerial interpretation if you zoom in a lot closer or if you're using drones even, but this national standard is quite a ways up in the sky looking for wetlands. So it does still miss the precise edge of wetlands, and heavily forested areas may not be captured because they're obstructed by trees and such. So those improvements are going on, and that's really great. It's important to note that there is a difference because it's aerial interpretation primarily. There can be a big difference between what is found in the field and what was found from the mapping. So here's an area with the updated VSWI. We're still in the Winooski Basin here. The teal is the VSWI, and the orange is the delineated wetland area. And then you see there is some overlap between the green, the teal, and the orange. About 66% of the actual wetland on the ground that was field delineated was not picked up by the VSWI. And that's close to an acre of wetland. So just to give you more of that context, is the mapping is helpful, but it doesn't find everything. And we are still working really hard to update the VSWI with the national inventory. So we updated the Missisquoi River Basin area. That's the highlighted spot on the map in early 2023. And then we updated the Winooski, Otter Creek areas and Pike River just this year. We have completed work for the Connecticut River Basin and Northern Lake Champlain direct here in the green, and we're hoping any day now to get this up for public comment so we can start that process and get the wetlands on the maps before next growing season. And hopefully hot on its tail is the rest of the state, to have another public comment period and adoption of wetland maps. And besides that, when we work on projects and we get delineation, sometimes consultants give us their work. And so we're always working as a program to add those wetlands on a concurrent basis. If you'd like to get updates on these map changes, you can go on to the environmental notice bulletin and sign up for updates, and you'll get an email whenever we're doing this. So I'd recommend that. Then that way you'll know what the latest and greatest is and when it's proposed for change. So just a couple more slides before getting into comments. So we are on the fourth box here on the slide. We are in the public hearing. This is our second public hearing. We pre-filed, we filed the draft rule with the Secretary of State. It's been noticed in newspapers, online, emails and such. This is our second public hearing. And there is a comment period that's going through till midnight on January 14th of next year, where you can submit comments in writing or give comments today here. Once we've collected all the comments, we will go to LCAR, the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rule, where all of the comments and responses will be filed and available to the legislators who are in that committee to consider this rule. That is a hearing that you may also attend if you'd like. You can provide testimony if you'd like. And Lauren is providing a link to their site on the chat. Thanks, Lauren, to being on top of that. And then the next step would be rule adoption. So I'm really looking forward to getting comments from you all, and I just want to take a moment to talk about helpful ways to provide comments for us. Certainly saying whether you approve of or disapprove of portions or all of the rule. You can certainly do that, but it's really helpful to provide some data or anecdotal information on the impacts of this change, both good and bad. You can include any legal or scientific support to go along with your comments, discussing suggestions for how we might go about implementing this rule change, or point out what issues there might be, and the rule change would help us with a smoother transition, and maybe consider some things that we need pointed out. And also it's helpful to tell your local story. How would these changes affect you, your neighbors, and your part of the state? It's really helpful to hear and hear those local stories as well. And again, these comments will be part of the administrative record of the rule change. So we can start working on getting through people's comments here today. If you forgot to say something, don't worry about that. We have this email address that you can send any written comments to if you want to add more, if you want to just soak in what you've heard today and write later, that's totally fine. We'll accept it through January 14th for the official public comment period. And those, again, I won't be able to respond to all of the comments today, but we will include responses online and in the record. Okay. So with that, I'd like to open it up for public comment, and Lauren, I can leave it to you to read from the chat room. And do we have on the sign-in sheet folks who have asked any questions? And while you're working on that, I see Zapata was asking about what LCAR reviews. they look at whether the rule changes follow statutory intent primarily. I've also heard them ask a lot of questions about public input and like the process of the rulemaking development, but primarily they're focused on the statutory intent. Okay. Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Yes, of course. Check those off. Or Belinda, okay?
Okay.
Jonathan. Okay, I'll go through the order and shoot. So Laura Hill, thanks. Hi, I'm Laura Evans and I'm an attorney in this work in land use and conservation, and I work chair of our town and a member of our commission. And I'm gonna just make some short comments and provide some written comments.
Okay.
I'm going to refer to the secretary in a way of saying the agency. So, secretary. So, as far as the statute goes, this seems to really reflect the intent of the current statute. Recently, the Vermont legislature passed Flood Safety Act. And in that, it says very clearly that there is a mandate to achieve wetland gains as part of an effort to increase flood resilience. And flood resilience has become a very big issue. My town was flooded. Barry Montpelier was devastated. And this seems to just be a way to just make that even sense, because wetlands are known to be good at mitigating flood impacts and damages. And that's what we need going forward as climate change gets worse. So the new law in the state actually said the wetlands of the state shall be protected, regulated, and restored so that Vermont achieves the net gain. But regulation and management of the water resources of the state, including wetlands, should be guided by science. When I saw these rules come out, I was really surprised because I hadn't read anything about it. And it seemed to just be like, where did this come from? And it just violates statute. The intent of the statute is not the letter of the statute. And it's not based on science, because I can't find any science that says build a house in a wetland and it will help you with climate change and flood mitigation, because it doesn't. And in fact, the secretary was required to submit a cost benefit analysis on what the rule would have for impacts. Didn't really do that. It just said generally that basically the compact growth, increasing compact growth in those developed areas would basically mitigate any of the impacts from building wetlands. There's no evidence provided for that anywhere in filing, which is really concerning, as the secretary says. And if you do an economic analysis, you'll find that it's probably more expensive to build. Once you put fill in a wetland and add housing to it, you've increased the impervious surfaces, so you're going to probably sound more flooding downstream. And in that area, the houses in the wetlands probably influenced by that. So the cost is not, the cost is there, and it's probably increased by adding houses wetlands. I'm not sure how you get to the idea that it's going to help, because possibly developers will want to build in a wetland because they think a lot cheaper, but in the long run, it's not going to be cheaper, it's going to be more expensive. And the communities will pay for somebody's, so I oppose the rule. I think it's not very well thought out. It's not being designed. I don't know what it's based in, except that the secretary felt somehow that she was supposed to comply with an executive order that was also not. So I oppose the rule.
Thank you, Lauren. And I believe folks couldn't hear you quite well online, so I'll just give a brief summary that you were saying that you oppose the rule, that the rule change, it doesn't follow legislative intent. There isn't scientific support for it, and this will be more expensive for communities, considering flooding and climate change, and that you will be providing more extensive comments in writing. Thank you. I think since the sound is through my computer, I might, for those of you in the room, just put a chair closer to my computer. Sorry if it's awkward, just make it a little easier. It's a little cozier, maybe. So Lauren, go ahead and see who's next.
Or go ahead, Jonathan, is it Goldhammer?
Yes.
Okay.
So number one, thank you for having the hearing. I think it's important to definitely get public comment. So I'm Jonathan Goldhammer. I am the Director of Operations for Green Mountain Habitat for Humanity. We are in a dramatic housing crisis in this state. We serve Chittenden, Lamoille, Franklin, and Grand Isle counties. There are no longer lots that we can build single-family homes on. They're just not available. There's none out there. We can't purchase them. They're not being donated. We can't build housing that way. We are looking at building more through purchasing larger lots. Those larger lots sometimes come with a wetland or a buffer attached to it. So if Green Mountain Habitat looks to build, we're moving from building 5 units of housing a year to 10. We're ready to do that. And in order to do that, we need to be able to take full advantage of a lot that we can. And in this way, there's a lot in Williston that is, the total amount is 12.36 acres. And currently, with the wetland delineation that has happened and the buffer zones, right now 2.63 acres of that is buildable. There's also a portion of that that is along, this is right along I-89. So there's also a buffer from I-89 going in to the property. A lot of the drainage that happens on this land does go through a wetland that is actually quite low, and the land that builds up along the 2 roadsides that abut the town, water and sewer, it's much higher. So it does delineate down to where the wetland is. That buffer does come up approximately, I'm going to guess, maybe 10 feet. So I totally understand flooding impacts and understanding the way a wetland works, and knowing that we need to be very careful around our wetlands and what we do. I'm not advocating for going in and building in wetlands, but I am advocating for common sense and development opportunities within that 25 foot. If we can move from 50 feet to 25 feet, what that would extensively do for us is, within the municipality, is for this project, the possibility of building 5 homes and moving that to possibly 12 homes, just by delineating that buffer zone, so that we can have a little bit more dense housing in that area. Now, the second part of that is, there is another piece within that 2.63 acres that is further back on the property. And that does go through, in order to access that, you'd have to go through a buffer zone. And currently that buffer zone, because this has been agricultural land, this was delineated, I believe, between 5 to 8 years ago by the state. There's already been, from that existing farm that was there, a lot of land use. And, you know, whether it was dropping of gravel within pastures and things like that, that have already changed the dynamic of that property. So I think that, number one, we have to look at, if we're going to build more housing, and for Green Mountain Habitat, if we're going to build affordable home ownership opportunities for people, between 50 and 80% of AMI, then we need to be able to build the most housing that we can. We're doing that through, like in the town of Winooski, a multifamily building was torn down. We tore it down, we built a 3-unit building. Those opportunities are available, but most of the time we're either doing a tear down or we're going to have to purchase a property that we can then develop. Development costs are huge. I'm all for advocating for more affordable home ownership through adjusting from a 50-foot buffer zone to a 25-foot buffer zone. If common sense says this looks like an opportunity where it's not going to mitigate or impact the wetland in a way that is going to be detrimental.
Thank you.
You can switch back to one online and then in person again.
Yeah. We have a couple of hands raised.
Have someone in chat and with their hand raised. Kelly, would you like to verbalize your question or I can read it off? I'll go ahead and read. Can folks hear me?
Yeah, she can hear you,
Okay.
but she can't unmute.
Oh.
Okay, I just checked unmute yourself, so I think you should be able to do that now, Kelly, if you could try.
There we go. Yes, thank you. So I had a
Okay,
couple of
and
questions. Go ahead.
1 second, I just want to turn the volume up. Oops.
Kelly.
I'm still here. I can hear you all.
Okay. Yep, she's unmuted, but through my computer microphone. So I'm
Okay.
sorry, folks.
All right. It's if anybody can hear me, does this work? Shall I go ahead?
I can hear you.
Super. So I guess I was thinking, first of all, scientifically thinking about that function of wetlands and how wetlands are connected, not just superficially, but beneath the ground. We're talking about the water table here. Scientifically, should we move that buffer to 25 feet without risking the function of those wetlands for flood capacity, for drought protection, not just wildlife habitat? And then I had an ugly question. I'm sorry to ask, elephant in the room here, but at what point is the state considered at capacity for housing? Do we subdivide ad infinitum? Do we welcome everybody who wants to move here, even if it means risking the healthy function of the ecosystem, the soils, the streams, the river, movement of the river, which has to be considered? We can't just put rivers where we want them. And then the final thing I wanted to say was that somebody else asked if we could be more creative in solving the housing problem. And one of my thoughts has been, for a long time, we have this green stormwater infrastructure push, and if we could find a way to promote and reward developers who implement this stuff, the green stormwater infrastructure, require our road crews and contractors to take the rivers and roads training that the state offers. Stacy Pomeroy offers that. Everyone raise the mower deck to 3 inches everywhere so that we can build our soils to retain water and fertility. We'll have our ag properties functioning well, and we will actually have our topsoil connected to the groundwater. Our vegetation will be healthier and more likely to withstand drought and erosion and floods. So sorry, that was a lot to unpack, but it's all there in the chat as well. Thanks for letting me ask and speak.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. Could folks in the room hear that much? No. She was talking about how the buffers might be important for the water table. And asked the question whether Vermont is at capacity for housing, and maybe if a creative solution might be to incentivize more green stormwater infrastructure with projects. I'm going to try one thing with the audio. To see if I can get us hooked up to the speakers. Okay. And folks in the next two. Lauren?
I'm on it.
All right.
Might have to mute the computer.
I did mute the cue. I think it's. Oh, wow.
It's the mic in the room, I think. Maybe.
Okay, I just turned the mic off in the room. And
She says,
I didn't push anything. I just put my finger on it. Put your finger on it again. Oh, it'll turn red.
okay. Okay, apologies. I tried to use the speaker in the room, but I can't use the speaker and not turn on the mic at the same time. Sorry about that.
Sounds like the best way forward is for folks who have their hands raised to drop their question in the chat. So everyone.
Yeah, so you can read it. Okay. All right. Yeah, we can take turns, but there is someone in the room who has a comment.
Linda, go for it.
Do you want me to sit over there?
Yeah, that would be great.
I can project.
Okay, thank you.
Do we need to introduce ourselves?
Yes, please.
Okay. My name is Melinda. I'm a senior environmental scientist with Hoyle Tanner and Associates. The reason I'm here is just to kind of more learn. But as somebody who is heavily involved in permitting, I've worked with Tina before. Shout out to Tina, she's great. I guess I just wanted to more try and gain some clarity since I'm not a wetland scientist. The big thing I kind of keyed in on is the definition of mapped wetlands. As you know and identified, we've got consultants going out all the time and mapping wetlands. So, in terms of, the class 2 unmapped wetlands not being, requiring a permit, what does that mean exactly? Are they unmapped wetlands not on your map? If you have a mapped wetland on your map and it's updated by a field biologist, is that applicable? If we could just kind of be, a little more explicit on that, I could see that kind of helping to facilitate this process.
Mhm.
You know, I guess my other comment is I've been in state government for many years before being a consultant, so I totally get the position you guys are in. It's got to be challenging. So, just in general, kind of providing clarity and consistency would be really helpful.
Yeah, and by mapped wetland, we mean on the VSWI. So, and that layer gets updated on a regular basis. So if it's been delineated, but it's not up on the map with that delineation, then it's the mapping that needs to be avoided for the allowed use.
Okay, yeah, that's better for me because I was kind of picturing like going in the field, finding a new wetland. Oh, it's not mapped. That means we can, you know, we don't need a permit versus I mapped a wetland, I gave it to you and you put it on your website.
Yeah, delineations will eventually go up, but the timing, like, might not be as quickly as the development project.
I see.
So we use what's on the mapping at the date, and that I believe is a detail to figure out is like, at what point is the mapping determined to be the mapping for that project based off of how far into construction or design that project's in.
Yeah, I could see that being kind of tricky. So, yeah, appreciate you guys.
All right, thank you. Yep.
From Susan Stasny in the chat, how can we be much more creative in solving this housing problem? What about all the people stuck in big houses they don't need any longer?
Okay, well, thank you for your comment. We'll include that.
Christine Doherty. Why is stormwater not included in the required utilities when stormwater systems are often a required utility for many multi-unit residential developments, and allowing them within 25 feet of a wetland to provide relief for sites with physical constraints needing to meet new stormwater permit requirements, parentheses, 3-year permits, for example?
Okay, yeah, thank you for your comment. We'll consider that. And Story Barton, I see that you're asking if we have to comment in the chat. We're having a bit of an audio issue here in the room, so if you unmute, folks in the room won't be able to hear you. I'll be able to hear you, and it will be included in the recording. It looks like a few people still have their hands raised. Maybe they still prefer to speak. I think I did that so they can unmute. Oh, thank you, Zapata. That would be great if you could. Looks like AP is the first hand raise. Alice?
Yeah, I just unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. I have a lot of thoughts going through my head here as I listen to everyone. My name is Alice Peel. I think some of you know me because I'm always contacting A&R and DEC asking questions. I'm Alice Peel. I'm a planning commissioner in Waitsfield, and I also do planning work and currently working on the new regional plan for Central Vermont CVRPC. All of my work is volunteer. What concerns me, number one, is that I think this rule change is, and especially the 25-foot buffer, is driven by Governor Scott's executive order. I find that Governor Scott's executive order is not based in science. And I'm certainly hearing that here is people are asking, and we're all asking, well, what kind of effect would the 25-foot buffer have? I think it's a bad idea. I agree with Kelly and anyone's comments about water tables, any kind of threat to the wetlands, because they're not only necessary to help absorb water in flooding, and but they have a very significant role in reducing climate change. The thing that I see here is there's a big look at an area in the village area of Waitsfield where there are significant wetlands and there's a significant push to build in those wetlands. And I see what people are thinking rather than going with this idea of enhancing the wetlands, is they're looking at ways of containing them so that then they can go and have other areas to build. So we can build here, but the wetlands will be fine over here. It's containment of the wetlands. And everybody's going, hooray. Now we can go with a 25-foot buffer because this will be terrific. Without any sense of the science behind it, without any sense of how this is going to affect the environment and flooding situations. And I'm hearing a term that's being used now that's going along with this hooray, with a 25-foot buffer, there's more area to build. They're talking about underperforming or non-functioning wetlands. And can we have those to work on? To build on. And I see no scientific determination about what an underperforming wetland is. I think it's it's just not, it's just a non-starter. If it's a wetland, it's a wetland. And there's a reason why it's underperforming. And we darn well know that humans can intervene and, yeah, reduce the quality and the impact and what the wetlands are supposed to do by human intervention actions. I also hope that because I go to A&R and DEC staff all the time for information and for the science involved in understanding wetlands, watershed, river corridors, etc., that I hope that A&R and staff at DEC, and I would ask this directly of Julie Moore, that A&R and DEC would bring to the legislature the science behind what's happening. And I hope that there are staff and directors in DEC and A&R that would support opposition to this wetlands rule change based on the governor's executive order.
Thanks for your comment, Alice. And thanks to Pata for typing some of it up for those of us in the room. Again, apologies for the audio. It looks like Dory Barton has her hand raised.
Hi, thanks, Laura. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks. Just for folks who don't know me, I am a wetland ecologist. I work with Arrowwood Environmental, and I have been delineating wetlands for, I hate to say, almost 30 years now. I just had a few comments in case I'm not able to follow up with written comment, and I did want to get some on at least on the record today. And I'll try and keep this brief. I too think that the proposed changes are in conflict with the goals of the new Act 121, in particular, the desire for net gain. I don't see how that's possible with relying on maps that do not have wetlands accurately depicted across the state. I think that the proposed rule changes lacks equity, and that we have a few towns that in their entirety benefit from the new rules, and that they will, we have several towns that will qualify for the allowed use just because they happen to be I think it's an opportunity zone. I think that lacks equity. I think that there'll be individuals that benefit from the lack of the science in this map-based proposal. And I don't think that's fair as well. I think that we need to focus on the problems in building in wetlands. I actually was quite surprised that this carried through with what was presented in terms of allowing actual building in wetlands. I thought this was going to be more focused on the relaxation of the 25-foot buffer. And I just wanted for the record to bring just a few comments in terms of why it's not a good idea to build in wetlands ecologically and for the structures themselves. Ecologically, I think others have said this, but we're going to see increased flooding from fill, loss of flood storage capacity, loss of wildlife habitat for food, nesting, and shelter. We'll have increased erosion. We'll have decreased water quality from stormwater and sediment. And on the structural front, building in wetlands most often results in ongoing problems for landowners. And here are just a few examples why it's just not a good idea to build in wetlands. Structures rot and decompose over time, mold, basement flooding, less flexibility for future expansion, poor septic capacity, and costly engineering and repairs. I can't tell you how many projects I've been pulled in on where I've seen, the impact of building in wetland from years ago. And I thought we were kind of past that in our state. And it's really disappointing to see that we are turning the clock back in terms of actually suggesting that building in wetlands is a good idea to address this housing crisis. I think that relaxing the buffer is an idea to be considered, in that not all wetlands function the same on the landscape. And I do agree that there are opportunities to reduce buffers in locations without negatively impacting wetland function and value. I think the current system where the wetlands program and applicants go through the mitigation sequence is working in terms of identifying where we have appropriate places to build. I also wanted to comment that this seems to be in complete dissonance with the Army Corps of Engineers and how they regulate wetlands in the state of Vermont. That it's not map based; it's actually science, on the ground based, and that if this rule goes forward, it's going to result in great confusion. And I can see a lot of potential for violations with folks not understanding that now the state of Vermont has the more lenient regulations, which I never thought I'd say, and that the federal government through the Army Corps is most likely going to be stricter in terms of development in these wetland locations. And then I had a question in terms of, if the map is going to be the rule, does that mean that if an area is incorrectly mapped and that there is no wetland, that is going to be off limits for development? Because if folks are able to petition to indicate that there's no wetland present, then I assume that you'd be able to petition that there is a wetland present. I mean, I think this is just setting up such a confusing process with the map-based determinations, which we have been through in other years past. And, you know, the decisions had been made that the science should rule the day. And I think that I would agree with that for now. Thank you.
Thanks for your comment, Dory. Yeah, a parcel that has no wetland on it, but no wetland mapping on it would be considered, I believe, to just not have wetland for the sake of the allowed use avoidance and minimization. But like I said before, we have been updating the mapping, so that timing of like when the mapping is updated and when the project is proposed or designed and permitted is a piece of the implementation that needs to be clarified more. Thank you. Okay, thanks, Lauren. Thanks.
Comment from Jim Andrews. I agree with Kelly Stettner and am opposed to loosening protections of our remaining wetlands.
Thank you, Jim.
A comment from Kelly Stettner, if wetlands are even partly defined by the nature/characteristics of their soils, it seems asinine to me to suggest that we can create wetlands elsewhere to replace ones we destroy through development. They are site specific. The land is wet in a certain area for a reason.
Thanks, Lauren. There's another person with a hand raised. I don't know how many are in the
Yeah.
chat. If you want to get a few more in first.
Yeah, I can get a few more of these in.
Okay.
So I can keep up. Tyler Marshall's response to Kelly Stettner's comment, very true, Kelly. It's entirely dependent on soil type, precipitation, slope, nearby waterways, etc., all things specific to that location. And then last comment as of now from Shane Jakewith in the chat. Shane Jakewith with the Nature Conservancy. Thank you for the helpful presentation and opportunity to ask questions and provide comment. I have the following question. After the catastrophic flooding of 2023 that caused so much pain and suffering for so many Vermonters, the legislature, recognizing the critical role of wetlands in mitigating flood hazards, mandated a 2-to-1 net gain of wetlands through a provision in the Flood Safety Act, also known as Act 121. That provision requires that for every acre of permitted wetland impacts, there would be a required 2 acres of restoration. Is it correct that the proposed rule change not only allows impacts to unmapped wetlands, but also does not mitigate those impacts and subsequently increases flood hazards in Vermont?
Thanks, Shane. I'll answer one part of that. For anyone who's jumped on later, I'll just say again that all of these comments will be included in a responsiveness summary in writing that will be available online and available to the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rule, who will be evaluating the rule change. Any activity that is an allowed use, this is an allowed use proposal. Any activity that's an allowed use does not go through the mitigation sequencing, so there is no compensation for loss in those instances. And we can follow up with more on your comments, Shane. Thanks. Okay. So, Clarice, I see your hand raised. You can unmute your mic. Yep, I can't hear you. Hmm. Still can't hear you. Okay.
Thank you, Claire.
I think that was the last comment in there.
Yes.
Were there any additional comments in the room? Yes, sorry. Yeah.
I just wanted to point out that the statutes also require that the all existing wetlands, mapped or unmapped, are to be protected. So this is in violation of that as well. My question is, or maybe suggestion is, I think probably an alternate that the secretary was asking for might be to try to get more resources for the wetlands program so they can map these designated growth areas before we decide that it's okay to fill in wetlands in those areas. That's it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'll go back to the chat. So Jim Andrews said, spec housing I see being built in my hometown of Salisbury is not affordable housing. They are large homes. I would prefer to see incentives to make sure that new home construction meet both quality and affordability standards. I also see many abandoned homes and businesses or upper floors of downtown areas where incentives could be used to turn these unused structures into affordable apartments or homes.
Okay, thank you, Jim.
And another comment from Kevin Tolan. I'm concerned about the lack of protection for non-mapped vernal pools. Vernal pools are small and temporary, making them easily missed during delineations or land surveys and from remote sensing. If they can be harmed in the time between discovery during development and a map is updated, the loss of the vernal pool can be irreversible and destroy local populations of breeding vernal pool specialist amphibians, not to mention the services provided for forest health, particularly if no remediation is required. Comment from Kelly Stetner, 100% agree with Jim on redeveloping currently unused properties. Perhaps streamlining the permitting process for those existing buildings could be part of the solution. I'm thinking specifically of several properties here in Springfield that have potential as multi-unit housing. Then Laura clarified Tyler Marshall's question in the chat. For clarification, the current rule is 50 feet from real world wetlands, and the proposal is for 25 feet from only map wetlands. Correct.
Okay, that's the end of the comments.
I think so. Please let me know if I've missed a comment.
Oh, here we go. There's one.
And I'd like to also express support following the science, creative solutions like building more vertically or looking into financial help for renovating existing structures. For example, here in Randolph, there are many decaying buildings which builders are not able to purchase because of onerous construction loan processes. Comment from Amy Rutledge. A majority of DEK's delineation of class 2 wetlands verified by the state include areas that were not PSW mapped wetlands or were an extension of mapped wetlands. I imagine this is the case for most consultants delineating wetlands and may well go unprotected.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, we're at time for today. Again, I'll say that this meeting will be posted on our YouTube channel, which Lauren put in the chat, and I can provide to those of you who came today. All of their comments will be included in a responsiveness summary. You have until midnight on January 14th, 2026 to provide comments as part of this rulemaking. That will be included in the official filing forms for the rulemaking and eventually going to the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rule for another hearing with the possibility for testimony at that event. So with that, thank you all for your time today. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions, and I will close the meeting at this time. Thanks, everyone.
Can I quickly throw something in there? I'm trying to copy and paste so I can track what others have said for my comments when I write them up. And unfortunately, I pasted and it doesn't show anybody's name of who said what. So is there any way that the chat can also be shared with the
And
group?
the chat be shared. We can download it. Okay. Yes, we can download the chat. And Kelly, I'll contact you with that. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Have a
you
good
very
afternoon.
much. Take
Bye.
care and Merry Christmas, everyone.
All right. Thanks, folks.